Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Generation Y from 4:30 to 5:30. I'm your host Osama Hussain. With me today I've got two fellow friends, students who I've known for a long time. I've got on my right Dawood Hussain.
Hello.
Assalamu alaikum. And I've got Ahmad, also someone I've known for a long time.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalam. Today's topic is going to be about the capital punishment. It's a topic debated all over the world, spoken about in houses, governments, courts even, and even teenagers up to adults, even pensioners are talking about it. Just a bit brief on capital punishment. Capital punishment is basically when someone is convicted of something like a murder or, for example, like rape in Saudi Arabia or things on the line like that. They're basically punished for the crime they've committed, and one of the punishments is to be executed in that sense. For example, nowadays you get executed with the injection. And we're going to talk about how over the years the capital punishment has changed and developed and become has advanced in many ways. Dawood, we're going to start off with by saying, talking about, actually it's open to you both, the capital punishment back in the 90s, it was more of a painful death, whereas now it's just a job and you're dead after a few seconds, 30 minutes. Yeah. Do you think it's fair on the people that were given the death, the punishment before, like for example the heads were chopped off or they were hung? Was that fair that they received that and nowadays they received the lethal injection?
I think back then, even during the 1990s, they did use a favourite capital punishment was the electric chair, and that was there to instill fear into the people, to deter people from doing such actions. But as that's progressed, as time's gone on, it has progressed to the lethal injection. It is sad that then people back then did go through all that. It is sad that they did have to go through that pain, that misery it said that when they're in the electric chair, it's actually a very humiliating experience. It's because during the actual experience they're unable to control their bodily fluids, so it's really humiliating for them. You know, everything's released. They're unable to control their body or their actions, so it is quite humiliating for them, and they're dying without no dignity. Nowadays, at least with the lethal injection, they do have some sort of dignity. They do die quite painlessly. It is quite instantaneous, so there's no heartbreak, there's no actual pain there, it's just instantaneous. So it is a very big thing, the fact that it's changed and become a more merciful death.
It does sound like it's a bit more of an easy death, easy way to get out. Ahmad, I'll ask you, obviously when you see, for example, a loved one's past being stabbed or a rape has happened or something on the lines of that, like that person suffered and been through that pain, and like Dawood's touched that, it's a bit unfair. Would you think personally it was fair on the person who's being convicted that they're able to now have a lethal injection that's not going to cause them exact pain, maybe a prick with the needle and that's about it? And do you think that's basically satisfying for the people whose family are basically lost a loved one or have suffered from an accident or something that's happened?
I think as a compromise, that compromise is definitely a good one. You obviously get the punishment being the death, and then you also get the family understanding that it's a peaceful one at that. As a punishment itself, it's definitely a little bit of a controversial one, but there's always the chance that it's going to be seen as something that's a little bit correct in some cases, seen as
one's a murderer and he goes on to kill 100 people, but one of those 10 kill one person, they're going to get the same punishment. Don't you think that's a bit unfair and it's a bit unjust that he's killed one person but that guy's killed several people? Like, let's say he's killed 100 people in fact, and he gets the same punishment. Is that fair, or should he be given like a painful type of injection that makes him suffer? Or would you say that's against humanity?
I think the aim of the capital punishment is to deter any type of such action, but like you said, if something like that was to occur, it is a bit unfair, the fact that one person may have killed one person, but another person might have killed a couple more. But at the end of the day, the result is the same. I think that's the point of capital punishment. It's like, say, even in, like you talked about Saudi Arabia, if you were to steal something from there, your hands get cut off to deter such actions, to to deter stealing or taking of someone else's possessions, and that's because it's such a severe crime and they see it as that. That's what they're trying to say with capital punishment. It's the fact that any such actions should be deterred, and it shouldn't be encouraged.
But like now, you can see in some countries capital punishment works. In other countries, it doesn't seem to be doing anything. Yeah. For example, countries that I've been to, I've think to myself, you know what, I double think what I say, never mind do, because I'm worried about what can happen or what it can cause. Whereas in some countries, I'm not. I'm thinking to myself, it's okay, it's not nothing big. Do you think the type of people that you're within, like the cultures that are in there, or have an effect on the way a person, like, basically, has that deterrence in them, that think, oh, I better not do anything here, or think to themselves, you know what, it's okay, I might get away with it, or something like that?
I feel like culture does play a very big part in laws and how laws are set in each country, and that's because each culture in each country is different, and that plays a really big part in how laws are set and what officials set as laws. And that's because in each country that's why, as far as you go around the world, no country more or less, there are similar laws, but you won't find, say, the same laws across the board. You won't see them everywhere you go, and that's because some countries find that acceptable and some countries don't find certain actions acceptable. And that's where, like you said, when you go to certain countries, you do need to watch yourself. You need to watch what you're saying, what you're acting, how you're acting, what you say to certain people. And that's because you don't know what the law of the land is there. You know certain laws that are generic throughout the world, but you don't know what certain, like, little things might just set people off.
I was just going to ask you, like we're talking about, in some countries it's there, in some countries it works on, and some countries works. What about some countries that have had the capital punishment and they've stopped? For example, in the UK, obviously, being a British Pakistani, both of you, what do you think to the fact that the capital punishment was once in place and now it's no longer in place? Like, do you feel that it was the right thing to do, or the wrong thing to do, or maybe you should have it in extreme basic circumstances?
I feel like when it comes down to the punishment, as a punishment, capital punishment was really, really harsh. At the end of the day, things like life in prison can be really, really damaging to a person's sort of demeanour and the way that they are. It can really have a major impact, and it can make them see that the wrong that they did really was something that they shouldn't do ever again. As a deterrence, it's definitely, jail itself is a really bad thing, a really big thing as well. But the capital punishment, it maybe if it was still here, you'd find a lot of people just thinking, nah, I'm not going to attempt to do anything to test that.
But do you think, because of, like, now you might hear of stories of corruption within jails and stuff like that, about how some jails might be more lenient than others? For example, you'll hear that once we went to a court with school, and one of the person took us around, they go, that judge is more lenient than that judge, and I thought to myself, wait a minute, that's more lenient than the other. It's a bit confusing. She goes, for example, one person didn't attend one of the ladies' juries, who was turned 18 and didn't attend because of a valid reason, and they didn't. That judge, the lenient judge, let him off with a caution, whereas the other judge had the same circumstance, had a more valid reason, said gave him a 3 months jail. They basically had to do 3 months in jail because that's a stricter judge. Do you feel that changes like that, cause of leniency and stuff like that, has a effect on whether justice is being done with capital punishment and stuff like that?
Well, you are right in saying that it can have a sort of, it's got a bit of an effect. And to be fair, when it comes down to it, you have to sort of think about some standards that can be set, especially in terms of what judges are able to do and aren't able to do. There should be some sort of standard, definitely. But it's all about a bit of a gamble, really. And to be fair, there could be like a repeat offence, in which case there may be, the judge that comes, and sees that it's the same person as last time, whether it's the same crime or not. But the idea of leniency, it's a difficult one to sort of deal with, seeing as there are just different situations in which different
Well,
things
like now,
can
for example, we've said with the jail, like you mentioned, that jail's a deterrent. But is it such a deterrent because, like I mentioned, about the corruption? Like, for example, you can nowadays there's drones and there's putting things into jails, and obviously some prisoners have got phones and things like that. Obviously, it's a bit weird that jailers have got phones and stuff like that, and stuff like that's not allowed in to the prisons, that they're able to possess such things, and such things happen in jail. So it's not exactly a deterrent. To be honest, the only thing I think about is the difference is you're away from your family. Maybe that's a deterrent. But for some criminals and murderers, a lot of which are some of basically psychopathic with the murders, some of them, it don't really affect them or have any issues. So do you think that if the capital punishment was here, it would help level things out?
Well, when it comes down to it, you have to understand that the crime that's actually committed, if it's worthy of a capital punishment, then by all means it should be instated. But the jail itself is something that has definitely, as you've said, sort of the idea of it being a deterrent has deteriorated, and it's all a case of different rules and different things that can be put in place to actually change that and make prison something that's feared once again. There are lots that can't be done in terms of corruption, as you've mentioned previously, but really it's all about being able to make sure that there are different things put in place, maybe not capital punishment, but definitely things that are put in place that can test people and make sure that they don't commit crimes.
I think the reason why capital punishment was abolished in the UK in, what was it, something like 1965, it's because of the fact that people saw that capital punishment was too harsh, and calmer heads in, obviously the government did abolish that because of that, and also it's because of the fact that obviously there were innocent people that had died because of a mistake or a wrong judgment call. For example, in the USA, there's documentaries across the board that show, for example, a man who'd been on death row for something like 22 years, and he'd been pardoned of all his crimes that he did not commit, but he'd been charged for them, and it was later found out that he was found innocent. And it's because of situations like that that capital punishment has been abolished in the UK.
For example, in America, it's well known that quite a few of the American states still have the capital punishment in place. For example, in Florida, about £35 million worth of spending spent every year just on basically first-class degree murder cases, resulting in a capital punishment. Don't you think that obviously moving it across to thinking, you know what, it's not right that if they didn't have this capital punishment, just had long life imprisonment, they'd be able to save this basically huge amount of money and spend it on sectors where needed, for example, education, health. Obviously, America hasn't got its own private healthcare, but this can contribute towards it and stuff like that.
No, I think there are certain things that obviously in America that, like you said, public health, obviously it's very private. It's not a full funded. It's not funded by the government. It's obviously private healthcare. So it does make sense that obviously if obviously capital punishment is really expensive. Lethal injection, electric chair, whatever it may be, is a really expensive expenditure for the government to be doing that. And like you said, some people might say that it is wasted on that, but some people obviously in America feel that it is needed. That's why it is the capital punishment is stated in 32 states.
Linking towards the corruption part, what we mentioned with Ahmad, for example, in America,
Yeah.
The reason I'm using America as an example is just that because in America it's well known the capital punishment
Yeah,
is
it's very
there
controversial.
clearly,
Yeah.
and it's very apparent that in some
Yeah.
states it's there, majority of them. And one of the figures that I basically found out from statistics was over 75% of murder conviction, basically capital punishments, who's basically killed a white person,
Yeah.
has resulted in them being executed.
Yeah.
It's a large number taken in consideration compared to the one where if a black person dies. Do you feel that could be due to race, or could you just think it's just a coincidence?
I think I'm not sure what Ahmad thinks, but I think it's because of the fact that obviously, you know, there is a bit of racism, and there is a bit of racism that's played there.
You feel that racism is still in the
Yeah.
justice part of justice?
There are some parts of it, so that's why before convicting, say, a black person, they do, in most cases, double check so that they're not making a mistake. Because if it isn't that black person, then they can be really badly ridiculed for that, and it'll look really bad on them. That's why I think when it comes down to a white person, that's why that figure is so high for white people. It's because obviously they don't put that much effort into maybe researching into what happened.
I feel like when it comes down to the idea that being more black people than white people, maybe it's a case of just history and how it sort of played itself out. Of course, there may still be racial tension and different sort of racist people in the American justice system, but you have to understand that when it comes down to it, there are a lot of people who are black who are in jails, and cut costs, definitely one of the ways is for capital punishment. Now that said, there aren't obviously going to be all black people that commit the worst of the worst crimes, but it just may be that the percentage of black people that have committed really bad crimes is really up there. And you have to also understand that jail itself may not be able to hold all the people that that
Yeah, it may not be a big enough deterrent.
yeah, exactly that as well. But people who commit the crimes and go through capital punishment are definitely the people that definitely deserve it, whether it's white person or black person. Maybe it is just the case that statistically you get more black people in jails, but we don't really know.
Obviously, it's all goes back to the courts and the judge and people on top of them. Who do you think would be the most responsible person? Say, for example, obviously we do know corruption is part of the justice system, and that is apparent. We all know. There's nothing to hide. Who do you feel would be responsible for example, let's say in America, who would be responsible in America or in Asia or in Europe or in Russia, for example, that these corruption, these basically corrupt views or corrupt ideas are in the system? Who do you think is responsible for them?
When it comes down to it, it must be the leader of the country. Of course, they will obviously instate people to sort of look over those types of things, but it's definitely their duty to do that sort of thing. Whether their ideals are a little bit racist or not, we don't really know, and you can't really say for sure. But you have to understand that it's not the it is definitely the leader of the country.
But would you say that even if for example, the leader outrightly says he's a racist person and he does have clearly racist views, and professionals themselves who study racism have said that this person is clearly racist with the comments he's made, and he's outrightly said that, yeah, he feels he's a racist, but personally he doesn't feel he is, but he knows his comments are. Do you think that this is basically one of the factors of of injustice, or like having basically a leader who clearly says he's racist? Do you think that these days we should allow other countries to have a leader who is a racist? For example, a lot of controversies surrounding with Donald Trump. Do you think that the United Nations should have allowed him to become, for example, a prime president of America?
I feel like a lot of countries' laws and mannerisms and the way that a government or a country, works comes down to who's in charge and who makes them things happen. And I think that because people see such a public figure such as Donald Trump, President Trump, make such comments and say, you know, certain things in the media, and the reach that he has to people isn't on a small scale, it's on a global scale. He has a reach to millions of people, and it's because of that people around the world might find it okay, or maybe not okay, but they find it acceptable to maybe be a bit more racist, or they find it a bit more lenient to have such views, because they see such public figures having them same views. So they see it the same way. They see it as, if it's okay for them, then it's okay for us. But at the end of the day, it is up to each individual of what they want to accomplish and what they want to do, and it's up to that individual if they want to differentiate and if they want to be different to what their leaders are saying or what their government is like.
Have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I also think that when it comes down to it as well, some of the famous people or people who have a little bit more power in society or influence on society, they can also make a big difference. Of course, you might have heard about Colin Kaepernick being the American footballer who, you know, was in the news for a few things as well. Even then, you have to understand that there's always going to be something that's bigger than everybody, and whatever that may be, it's difficult to sort of put a finger onto it and say that that's the reason why, and you know, be able to change things. When it comes down to change as well, there's a lot of sort of influence from, you know, the other side maybe that people want to oppose against, and that's one of the reasons why you might find that there's, you know, a little bit more racism still, despite all the changes that may have occurred.
Right, thank you, Ahmad. Thank you, Daud. Viewers, please don't go anywhere. We're only going for a short break. We'll be back with you as soon as possible. Thank you.